Foreign policy. Extraordinary challenges. I know that the Senator has in mind the challenges to Mr. Obama, but for everyone who's trying to understand foreign policy, there's a challenge. And we have a greater challenge than the President does because he knows what he's doing. and we have to figure it out. And we're indebted to Senator Cardin for helping us with that this evening. As all of you know, Senator Cardin is, well, in fact, you all know him. It's hardly necessary for me to make an introduction, but lest two or three of you don't know his career, I'll mention a few things. As you know, he's a graduate cum laude, University of Pittsburgh, first in his class, University of Maryland Law School, one of the youngest people elected to the House of Delegates here in Maryland, served from 67 to 86 in that body, chaired the Ways and Means Committee for a number of years, and was Speaker of that body for the last 7 years. He established a reputation, which continues across his entire political career, of a great deal of earnestness, seriousness, and integrity. He also, as you all know, is interested in social questions as well as fiscal matters. Elected to the Congress, he served 10 terms, 20 years in the House of Representatives. With respect to foreign policy, he served on the Trade Committee there, and he twice addressed this body on trade questions, 2 of the 5 times that he's addressed this council before this evening. And he also was active on the commission, the Helsinki Commission, for security and economic security and cooperation in Europe. And he also served not only on that commission, but as the ranking member for a period of years. Within the Senate, he now serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, that great centerpiece of American foreign policy, one of the truly august committees within our governmental system. And on that committee, he serves on the subcommittees for European affairs, African affairs, and for the Near East and South Asian affairs. He also serves on the Judiciary Committee, where he is the chairman of the subcommittee on terrorism and homeland security. So in the Senate today, he bears some very heavy responsibilities and very interesting committees. As I said, he has a reputation for, as some people say, reaching across the aisle, but also for great integrity. And for those of you who have seen him in congressional hearings, he doesn't showboat. He doesn't preach a particular cause. His questions, I think, are always serious and to the point and well-intended and respectful. Maryland is very proud to have Benjamin Cardin as its junior senator, a man who serves, I think, Maryland and the nation extraordinarily well. It's my great pleasure to present to you the junior senator of Maryland, the Honorable Benjamin Cardin.
Dr. Burd, thank you very much for that overly generous introduction. I appreciate it very much. I didn't realize this is my 6th time that I spoke here, and that this is your 26th year, I believe, for the Baltimore Council, which is 29th year, which is a great record for our community. And we thank you for your leadership and what you have been able to do to bring focus to foreign policy here in Baltimore so that we can have serious discussions. I tell you, every time that I've had the opportunity to be here, it causes a staff meeting in my office where we debate the issues before we. So it's very helpful to me to have this opportunity to be here and to challenge our office as to what we should be doing and how the Congress should try to respond to some current issues. I'm very proud to serve in the United States Senate. I hold what's known as the Sarbanes seat. Paul Sarbanes for many years was our senator, and really exemplified, I think, how a senator can get involved in foreign policy issues. He served on the Foreign Relations Committee for many years and was a great example for me to follow in the United States Senate. And I know that we all send our deepest condolences to Senator Sarbanes on the loss of Christine. There was a memorial service last week for his wife, Christine, who was a real partner of his in public policy, but in her own right was a strong leader. You know, she served on an international committee in Congress, a club in which my wife Myrna took her space when I was elected. So it's a great loss for our community, and I know that we all send our condolences to Senator Sarbanes. I don't think any of us would have predicted a year ago that where we would be today. First of all, a year ago, if we thought we'd be concentrating primarily on Iraq and foreign policy in the Congress of the United States, not the economy. So that's one major change. I don't think a year ago we would have predicted that Barack Obama would be president of the United States, and what would have happened as far as the elections in our own country. A year ago, we wouldn't have predicted the Baltimore Orioles would be in first place in the American League. So a lot has happened in the last year. Now, I'm in my third year now in the United States Senate, and I love the Senate. I thank the people of Maryland for giving me the opportunity to serve with Senator Mikulski, the two of us in the United States Senate. We have, it's an incredible opportunity. I'm often asked the difference between the House and Senate, and there's a great deal of difference, the size being perhaps the most notable. Of course, the 6-year term also is very helpful. Dr. Burd mentioned that I served for 10 terms in the House. That comes up every 2 years. In the Senate, we're blessed with a 6-year term, so I could do something I hadn't done in over 20 years, and that is go through an election cycle without being on the ballot, which was a difference and change. The committees are different. In the House, I served on one committee. In the United States Senate, I serve on 5 committees. So I serve on the Judiciary Committee, as Dr. Burd pointed out. I also serve on the Environment and Public Works Committee, which has very important issues dealing with global climate change. I serve on the Budget Committee that just completed its work on the next year's budget, serve on the Small Business Committee, which is particularly important during these economic downturns, serve on the Foreign Relations Committee, which I think is perhaps of the most interest this evening to this group. The Foreign Relations Committee is chaired by Senator Kerry, who follows Senator Biden as the chairman of that committee. And we do meet frequently in very informal settings with world leaders in order to try to advance U.S. foreign policy. So it's an incredible opportunity in the United States Senate. I also serve on the Helsinki Commission that Dr. Burd talked about, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I now chair the Helsinki Commission in the United States Congress. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But let me tell you, yesterday I was with Senator Clinton, Secretary of State Clinton, in the State Department as she hosted the reception in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Antarctic Treaty, one of the most successful treaties internationally, which governs the use of the Antarctic region for science, demilitarizes it totally, and eliminates, I think, any of the tension that could exist in that part of our world. We had many ministers from other countries that were present yesterday at the lunch at the State Department. I had a chance to talk to many of them. And I can tell you the excitement that they have about the change in opportunities internationally as a result of the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States. He has, he's just, of course, completed this foreign policy trip, this trip where he was with the G20 in London and then visited a meeting of our NATO, and then today being in Turkey. And the reception was just incredible. World leaders just trying to get a little bit of time with our president. What a change. What a change. I mean, there is opportunity now. The international community is looking to America with the type of cooperation that is critically important to advance U.S. interests. So the question is, what exactly is the Obama foreign policy program? And what can we do to take advantage of the opportunities that now present us? Remember, there are incredible challenges, and we have a lot of things that we need to do. I want to talk a moment about the Helsinki Commission, because I do believe the Helsinki Commission does give us some opportunities that perhaps you're not as aware of. 4 decades ago, a framework was developed by Europe and the United States and Canada to deal with human rights issues, to deal with economic and environmental issues, and to deal with security issues. It now is comprised of 56 countries, all the countries of Europe, the countries of the former Soviet Union and Central Asia, the United States and Canada, and it's recognized under Article 8 of the United Nations Charter as a regional organization. It represents common commitments that every country in Europe, every single country in Europe, and the countries of Central Asia, Canada, the United States have made on human rights issues, on central issues concerning security. It's equally binding on every country. It works by consensus, and we have the right to challenge each other's conduct as being in compliance with these international standards. The 3 baskets are very much interrelated. We don't believe that you can have security unless you also have economic justice. You can't have human rights without economic justice. You can't really have a country that's secure unless you have basic respect for human rights. And the relationship between the 3 baskets are very clear. The structure works through basically our foreign ministers, our Secretary of State. They meet every December, and one takes on the leadership as chairman of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. This year it happens to be the foreign minister from Greece. There are missions represented by an embassy that we have in Vienna, where an ambassador heads up that position and represents the United States in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. There's a parliamentary assembly. I am the vice president of the Parliamentary Assembly, and we are the legislative arm of the OSCE. And then there's the U.S. Helsinki Commission. The U.S. Helsinki Commission is unique. It's set up by law. It was created in 1976 by an act of Congress. It consists of 9 senators and 9 congressmen and 3 members of the president's administration, 1 from state, 1 from commerce, and 1 from labor. And we work together on implementing the U.S. commitments under the OSCE. It is the U.S. participation in the OSCE. Now, enough about the structure. It has been very effective in carrying out U.S. policies. Let me just talk about some of the successes that we've had within the OSCE and the Helsinki Commission. It's probably best known for its work in freeing Soviet Jews during the Soviet Union Day. It was the main focal point for the work for protecting and freeing Soviet Jews. More recently, it has dealt with human trafficking and developing a strategy in every country in Europe to stop the trafficking, mainly of young girls, but to develop new laws and monitoring not only in the sending countries where most of the focus had been historically, but also in the receiving countries, including the United States. It has dealt with anti-Semitism and racism and xenophobia, developing international conferences to deal with that. It has monitored elections, including the election in the United States. And it's its stamp of approval that whether an election is free and open. If the OSCE does not certify it as a free and open election, its results will be challenged internationally as far as legitimacy is concerned. It has field missions. It has field missions in many troubled areas of the world, including Kosovo and Georgia and Moldova, and these missions have been extremely effective. Andrei Sakharov, the human rights advocate from the Soviet Union, said the whole point of the Helsinki Accords is to mutual monitoring, not mutual evasion of difficult problems. So it's important to do a self-evaluation. And the reason I go through this is because we have a responsibility, America has a responsibility, to comply with our commitments under the OSCE. And we're being challenged. We're being challenged in many quarters. Let me mention one that may not become obvious: the use of capital punishment. The United States is out of compliance with the European and international acceptable standards for the use of capital punishment. There's a debate going on in the Maryland General Assembly today and in other legislatures around the nation as to whether we shouldn't change the way we apply capital punishment or eliminate capital punishment. But the Bush years were perhaps the most challenging period for the United States within the OSCE in its 34-year history, mainly for the way that the United States handled detainees in our new war against terror. Abu Ghraib, of course, has been seared into the thoughts of many people around the world. Guantanamo Bay is obviously a symbol of concern internationally. The use of enhanced interrogation techniques. That means torture, for those who can't figure out what we're talking about here. The United States' use of torture. Extraordinary rendition. When you pick up a suspected terrorist in the field, and you don't want to have dirty hands here, so you turn them over to another country that you know will torture that person and to interrogate him. And we do that without any judicial review or without any due process. That was done by the United States. There was serious damage done to U.S. reputation and our ability to advance our values and to work with coalition partners because of our policies, America's policies, being so much out of step with our international commitments. It put the United States at risk. So when I gave a report at the winter meeting of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in Vienna in February about our new president and our new administration and the change of the U.S. policies as it relates to civil liberties, I got a standing ovation. The international community understood that America recognized the mistakes that we had made, took steps to change it, and was prepared again to live up to our commitments within the OSCE. I announced that President Obama was closing Guantanamo Bay. That is perhaps the international icon of international abuses of civil liberties for detainees. That the president was setting up a special task force for detainee policies on how we would handle detainees. We should have done this a long time ago. This is a different type of a war. It's different. It's not the traditional battles that we're used to where soldiers are fighting soldiers from one country and another. The war against terror is a little bit different than that. It's quite different than that. But we need to develop international standards on how we are going to handle detainees, what type of rights they get, how they get them. It's not what America says is right. It's what the international community has said is right. And I hope that the Obama administration, in its use of its task force, will consult with and work with the international community to develop Geneva Convention-type standards for detainees. Now, the president said all conditions of confinement everywhere must comply with Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention and other applicable laws, making it clear that we will comply with the Geneva Convention. All conditions. Interrogation techniques of all government personnel must be consistent with the Army Field Manual. What does that mean? That means no more CIA exceptions to interrogation. CIA will close any and all of its detention facilities. The International Red Cross will have access to every detainee, as they should. And reliance on any legal advice concerning interrogation issued between September 11th, 2001 and January 20th, 2009 is prohibited. You can't rely upon the advice given by the Office of Legal Counsel within the Attorney General's office that said that the president had extraordinary powers, the CIA had extraordinary powers. Those legal opinions, which are, by the way, not public, so we all haven't had a chance to see them, but you can't, a government worker, a military person, a general, a director of the CIA, an attorney general, can't rely on those prior opinions as justifications for action, and that waterboarding is torture. We all know that waterboarding is torture. This is not a close call. But now we have an Attorney General of the United States, which, by the way, has exercised some gutsy independence, I thought, telling us that waterboarding is torture. We have a director of the CIA who has said that. So President Obama summed it up best about our policies to be safe and protect civil liberties in his inaugural address when he said, "We reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals. Our founding fathers, faced with perils we can scarcely imagine, drafted a charter to assure the rule of law and the rule of man, a charter expanded by the blood of generations. Those ideals still light the world, and we will not give them up for expediency's sake." So the first fundamental change that the Obama administration announced on foreign policy is that America will respect and adhere to the international standards that have been worked for so many years to protect the rights of the international community. The OSCE has not only 56 countries that are members, it has what's known of countries that are members for cooperation in addition to the 56. It includes Israel, it includes Jordan, it includes Egypt, it includes Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Afghanistan. And our commission works very closely with these countries to have OSCE type of commitments in all three baskets and to advance peace in that region. It was for that reason that I took a trip to the Middle East in February of this year. I headed it on behalf of the Helsinki Commission, and we visited Israel and Syria. Now, Israel, we had a chance to meet with President Perez, Prime Minister Olmert, the new Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Mr. Fayyad. Our timing couldn't have been better. We were there just a few days after the Israeli elections. And it really, I think, represents a real test for the approach that President Obama is taking to foreign policy. And let me talk about that, because President Obama's goals in the Middle East are very similar to President Bush's goals in the Middle East. The president wants to see two viable states, Israel and the Palestinian state, living side by side in peace with secure boundaries. That is what President Bush wanted. The policy hasn't changed, but the way of achieving those goals have changed. We have a president who's willing to engage the international community, including the countries in the Middle East, and build broader coalitions. And I think that's going to be the key point. This administration wants to build broader coalitions. So we are doing things that were not done before. Now, there are challenges in the Middle East. Make no mistake about it. We all understand that. This has been, the problems have been going on for literally thousands of years. In Gaza, the controlling political entity is ruled by Hamas. Hamas has sworn the destruction of Israel and uses terrorist tactics in order to carry out its goal. There are tunnels between Egypt and Gaza in which Egypt has shown little ability or willingness to stop the flow of weapons to Hamas. The regional countries very much control the stability of that region. And with Iran and Syria and other countries, that presents significant problems for seeing how we get to the U.S. goal of two states living side by side in peace. But there are encouraging signs. Encouraging signs. During the attacks in Gaza, there was virtually no problems on the West Bank at all. And the West Bank security was controlled by the Palestinians, an encouraging sign. I talked to Senator Mitchell both before and after my trip. Senator Mitchell, of course, is the president's special envoy. He believes that we can achieve our goals in the Middle East. He believes that these are achievable goals. And then listening to Mr. Netanyahu, I talked to Mr. Netanyahu again several days after the Israeli election when it wasn't yet clear how he would form a coalition government. And he could have been a little bit more strident, and he wasn't. The language he used with our delegation was very conciliatory towards moving forward with peace discussions with the Palestinians. And let me use his own words that he used on March the 24th. Peace is not the last goal. It's a common goal for all Israelis and all Israeli governments, mine included. This means I will negotiate with the Palestinian Authority for peace. I think the Palestinians should understand that they have in our government a partner for peace, for security, and for rapid economic development of the Palestinian economy. Now, clearly, to achieve this, we're going to need help from the region. So I went to Syria. Now, Syria is an interesting country. They do a lot of bad things. We need to understand that. They have a weapons program which is against U.S. interests and very bad weapons they're trying to develop. They have been allowing the rearming of Hezbollah through Syria, which is the destabilizing influence not just to Lebanon, but also to Israel. They allow Hamas to have their headquarters in Damascus. And they have a relationship with Iran that is puzzling and against U.S. interests. Historically, one would not think that Iran and Syria would be good friends, and yet their relationship has gotten closer. I had a chance to meet with President Assad, the young new president of Syria. We had, I think, a very frank discussion. The Obama policy in regards to Syria, well, we're looking for an open dialogue. Is that possible? Well, Syria wants to be more relevant in the Middle East. That is clear to us. They want to get the Golan Heights back as part of Syria. And there have been significant talks between Syria and Israel through Turkey. Senator Mitchell indicated to us that he thought those talks were pretty close prior to the attacks within Gaza. We have a young president who wants to set a different course for Syria. In my meetings, I saw a willingness on behalf of Syria to insist that Iran comply with its international obligations under the International Atomic Energy Agency. So I suggested to President Assad in our meetings, why not show your willingness for change? Why not ask Hamas to leave Syria? There's no real reason why you, Syria, should want Hamas, a terrorist organization, in your country. Ask them to leave. That would also show that you are truly independent from Iran. Well, didn't exactly get the reply that I wanted, but it was interesting. The Syrian paper reported our meeting as developing bilateral relations through positive dialogue based on mutual respect and a joint interest in finding joint solutions to the region's problem. That wasn't a bad editorial, but I'm going to base the progress of my visit and U.S. policy on actions within Syria. In that region, the most difficult country is Iran. We know that. Iran has a mission to develop a nuclear weapons capacity, which could be a game changer in the Middle East, and something that the Bush administration and the Obama administration has said that they will use every available tool in the arsenal to prevent from happening. In the region, though, the most recent initiative was from the Obama administration in regards to Afghanistan and Pakistan. I was in Pakistan last year, had a chance to meet with the leading authorities in that country. The Obama administration announced a new policy just 10 days ago. And then in NATO meetings just this past weekend, got commitments from our NATO allies to help us in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, this administration wants to narrow its mission to fighting terrorists, to getting rid of al-Qaeda. But it requires an increased troop level. In February of 2006, America had 20,000 troops in Afghanistan. In June of last year, we had 48,000 troops in Afghanistan. And the Obama administration is asking for 17,000 more troops in Afghanistan. They want the Afghans to take more responsibility. General Jim Jones, our national security advisor, stated, and I quote, "For several years, the resources that our commanders in the field needed for training have been not provided simply because of the demands elsewhere, such as Iraq." Now that will change. The 17,000 additional troops that the president decided to send to Afghanistan can increase our training capacity in Afghanistan. General Jones goes on to say, Afghan national security forces can increasingly take responsibility for the security of the Afghan people themselves, which is our ultimate goal. You may not be aware that the OSCE also has missions in Afghanistan, border missions, dealing with Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Our strategy for successful policy in Afghanistan must also include Pakistan. In Pakistan, the government needs help. It cannot control the border areas with Afghanistan. There are terrorist organizations, including al-Qaeda, that operate freely in the border areas within Pakistan. So one of the issues is whether we should refocus our foreign assistance. We provide billions of dollars annually to Pakistan, and the Senator Kerry and Senator Lugar have suggested increasing that amount by $1.5 billion a year for the next 5 years to strengthen Pakistan's ability for its own democracy. The economy in the region we are talking about, in Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan, is heavily dependent upon terrorist, criminal elements, drug trafficking, and the question is whether we can't substitute an economy for that region that is based upon legal activities. That's the desire of Senator Kerry and Senator Lugar, and whether we can create opportunity zones within this Afghan-Pakistan region. The Obama administration supports those objectives. Now, I must tell you, I think the policy in Afghanistan and Pakistan are high risk for the United States. I'm not sure how and when we will achieve the objectives that President Obama has recently laid out. But I'm not sure we have any other choice. I'm not sure what other choices are available to the United States in this area. But I hope we can do this with a broader coalition. And that's why I was very interested in the President's meetings with our NATO allies. He did get some encouraging news. I would have hoped it would have been a stronger commitment. But for me, the country that we really need to reach out to, and this may seem a little bit strange, but the country we really need help from is Russia. It's hard for the United States to achieve its objectives without help from Russia. And Russia knows Afghanistan. They know it well. They also know Iran. They do a lot of trade with Iran. They're very much involved in Iran's military policies. And they also know that a nuclear power, weapons power, Iran would be destabilizing not only to that region, the Middle East, but to the Muslim world that was under the Soviet Union, in which Iran could become a very destabilizing impact. So I think it's in Russia's interest to work with the United States for an effective policy to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapons power. It's also in Russia's interest to work with us on other common areas of interest. Now, make no mistake about it, there are major concerns that the United States has against Russia, and we can't abandon those issues. We can't abandon what Russia has done in Georgia. We can't abandon Russia's allowance of violence against independent journalists and not bringing the culprits to justice. We can't abandon Russia's failure to allow opposition leaders an equal opportunity for access to the public and to elections. So we need to make these issues clear to our Russian friends, but we do need Russians' help, and we do need to seek a new way of dealing with Russia. The Obama policy, I think, has been pretty clear. President Obama has spent a good deal of time with Mr. Medvedev, the president of Russia. And I think that will continue. OSCE is the only regional organization that includes both Russia and the United States. And I believe we have an opportunity within OSCE to improve our relationship with Russia. Secretary of State Clinton was a commissioner on the Helsinki Commission. She fully understands the potential of OSCE. So when I met in Vienna with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, I took it upon myself to meet with our Russian delegation from the Duma. And we agreed to continue meeting and to develop opportunities to improve the relationship between Russia and the United States within the parliaments, and to specifically move forward on some agenda items. Mr. Medvedev has mentioned a new security arrangement for Europe that Russia would like to see seriously considered. It's a security arrangement that I'm sure the Russians would like to see rather than NATO. We won't give up NATO. NATO is an important institution for U.S. interest. But NATO, we believe, needs to focus a good deal of attention on the Middle East. There are not a lot of direct security threats against U.S. interest in Europe. There is in the Middle East. Having a new security arrangement that includes Russia could very well be in the U.S. interest. So we would like to move forward and talk about the Russian recommendation, and we'll take that up. I personally think we can work with Russia on energy legislation. Energy legislation is critically important to the United States. We need to develop a policy of energy independence. We need to do that for the sake of our national security so we don't fight wars over the need for energy. We need to develop that for our economy so that we're not faced with uncertainty on energy cost, and we need to do it for our environment because global climate change is real. We've got to deal with the environmental risks. I think we can make progress with Russia on energy issues. There's a critically important meeting that will take place in Copenhagen in December. The Obama administration intends to be present at that meeting and to be a leader in moving forward on global climate change legislation internationally as well as in the United States. And I'm hoping that we can improve our relationship with Russia and have a common agenda in regards to energy. What's amazing is that we can have these discussions, which represents the progress that's been made in the last year. We have an administration where these new opportunities are now available to us through our foreign policy discussions. The international community welcomes these debates. President Obama is sought out by other leaders around the world. They want America to lead. America is now ready for these challenges. I am optimistic about our future. I believe we will continue to make progress. I am not naive about the challenges, but I tell you, I'm energized every day by our new administration and the opportunities it presents to the international community and to our own country. Let us be prepared to take advantage of these new opportunities. Thank you all very much.
Well, we certainly thank you. Senator Cardin will recognize you and repeat the questions.
Yes. The question is, I haven't talked about North Korea, and certainly it's not because of its lack of importance. North Korea is a country in which its citizens are suffering terribly because of an economy that cannot perform with the priorities that North Korea has placed on military and the failure to deal with the economic reforms necessary for the progress of its own people. Instead, North Korea continues to look towards developing military weapons, including the ability to deliver nuclear weapons through the use of missile technology. Its most recent test was clearly hostile. It was an effort to develop a delivery system. It failed the test, but they are still violating international agreements, and that is clear. That's why there was an emergency session of the Security Council. That's why Dr. Rice, our ambassador to the UN, has sought out the international community to speak with a unified voice against North Korea's military objectives and its failure to comply with international agreements. There is a view, and I think the Obama administration shares this, that North Korea is doing this for the purposes of enhancing its ability to negotiate. I'm not sure what it's trying to get out of this, but I would hope that the international community will speak with a strong voice against what North Korea has done, and that there will be the renewal of the mechanism that's currently in place in negotiating with North Korea. I do think there's a way of solving the North Korea problem in a peaceful way, and I'm sure that the Obama administration will follow those lines. You've mentioned two areas that the Foreign Relations Committee has spent a lot of time, one Mexico, the other the problems in the Sudan, particularly in the Darfur region. We had a delegation that has, our chairman of our committee actually just, I think is right in Cancun now, if I'm correct, or he's planning to travel there, Senator Kerry, in an effort to talk to the government of the Sudan, despite the fact that its leader has been indicted by the International Criminal Court. In Mexico, let me start with Mexico. Mexico presents a real challenge to the United States from the point of view of dealing with the increased amount of drug activity and violence that is taking place within Mexico and within the United States. The good news is the Mexican government wants to deal with it and is trying to deal with it. They acknowledge the problems that have come up from further south into Mexico and now into the United States. Cartels that are very violent and are leading to increased activities within the United States. And we need to develop a common strategy with Mexico to deal with that. The Obama administration is working with the Mexican government to develop a policy that can work, which will include additional resources. And our committee is strong, and I strongly support these initiatives with the Mexican government. In regards to the Sudan, there are still genocidal conditions. There are still horrible things happening in the Sudan. The Sudanese government has refused to really deal with it. Their current attitude in regards to the NGO community and access of their commitments to allow the outside military presence to protect the population is something that we cannot allow to happen. So the international community is going to have to step up even more aggressively in that region. And the United States, I think, has provided strong leadership and will continue to do that and has saved lives in the Sudan. I think we have saved lives in the Sudan. But there's still vulnerability, there's still incredible risk there to the local population and to the workers that are there. And we're going to have to get a stronger international presence in that region. The question wants to follow up more on the North Korea issues, and the question is, what's China's attitude? Well, China is friendly with North Korea and has indicated that it is not prepared to support a Security Council resolution that would be very critical against North Korea's use of this test of a missile to deliver a nuclear weapon. However, China traditionally has not wanted to be in the position to veto a Security Council resolution. That's not been their normal way of using their seat as a permanent council member of the Security Council. I think that Dr. Rice is now negotiating, as is the normal course, with both Russia and China, working with the other members of the Security Council who strongly support our position of trying to make it clear to North Korea that they cannot violate their international commitments. I don't know how it comes out. I really don't. But I do believe that we can be successful in preventing North Korea from moving forward in its desire to be able to deliver at some distance a nuclear weapon. You have read in some very reputable national papers that we're going to give away Alaska to Russia. That's not what you said. I thought I would get more attention if I worded the question. Alaska's safe. We are not giving Alaska to Russia. We will not let that happen under any scenario. So, well, there's always debates. That Russia has always been, Russia's been aggressive in trying to exercise what it sees as its rights, and particularly in regards to fishing rights and oil rights. And there's been international disputes, including those with the United States, as it relates to claims for mineral rights and fishing rights. But I expect that the United States will be very aggressive in protecting the rights of Alaska and our country. And let me expand this a little bit. I do think you will find, and I'll incorporate your question into my answer, I do think you will find that the Obama administration and Congress will want to be more actively involved in Africa, more actively involved in regards to trade and commerce. AGOA has worked well, the African Opportunity Act, which has opened up trading opportunities between the United States and Africa. We do believe that it's in our interest to do that, and it will also help the countries of Africa. We will not compromise our position in regards to human rights issues. So when we see genocidal conditions in the Sudan, we're going to do everything in our power to prevent that from happening. And we will take on governmental leaders to do that, and we will work with the international community. The good thing in regards to the Sudan is that Africa understands this, and it's Africa that has provided the real opportunity to prevent that from happening. And we are very supportive of that and making it happen. There are other countries in Africa whose elections are clearly outrageous and violated international standards, and we will speak out when we believe that human rights are not being adhered to and election standards have not been done and human rights have been violated, and we'll continue to do that. But we will work very strongly to open up more opportunities for the United States and African countries. President Obama did a great job at the G20. Remember, prior to going, we had the prime minister, or the president of Germany, saying she was about ready to walk out of the meetings. The France were claiming that they weren't going to adhere to anything that the United States wanted. We had the Czech leader who, I forgot what he called the Obama plan, but it wasn't very complimentary. So we had our president walking into a meeting in which there were pretty hostile forces. The meeting, I thought he turned around very well to the U.S. Position. We had reasonable expectations of what we could achieve at the G20. It was not something we didn't expect to perform miracles. And I think the president exceeded the expectations of the G20 meeting. We came out with some very positive results and a pretty unified meeting of the G20 as it related to the economic issues. So, and Europe particularly, I thought he did extremely well. In the meetings afterwards, I thought he did very, very well. So I think he achieved our objectives. Now, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm rarely happy with what I hear in Europe these days. The Doha round on trade, to me, it's not exactly over yet, but it's pretty much a disaster. And I think that's laid directly at Europe, that they've refused to allow the type of progress that needed to be made on agriculture. They blocked it. So Europe has done things that I think have been counterproductive. Having said that, I agree with the way that President Obama handled the meeting by saying, quite frankly, that he thinks that there are increasing opportunities between the United States and Europe. And I hope we can make progress with Europe, but make no mistake about it. America's future is not only tied internationally to Europe, but to Asia and to Africa and to South America. So I think the president's handled this very well, but we do expect Europe to understand that there are other places in the world other than just Europe. The question deals with South Africa. You know, there's serious problems in South Africa. The South Africans are trying to deal with these problems currently within their legal system. And I think that we should give South Africa a chance. I mean, they're an independent country. They're a democratic country. And it's a very interesting point that was made. And this may seem like I'm changing the subject, but people have said, you know, Hamas was elected by the Palestinians in Gaza, so shouldn't we respect their elections? Just because you have an election doesn't mean you're a democracy. And it doesn't mean if you're a democracy, we're always going to agree with your elections. So, you know, I think we have to give countries a chance to figure out what they need to do. And in South Africa, I'm prepared to give the country a chance. Well, again, I'll try to incorporate your question into the answer. It deals with what type of a regulatory system will work. And, you know, clearly we had a failure of our regulatory system in this economic crisis. I mean, AIG is probably the best example. AIG, we thought, was an insurance company. They didn't get into trouble because of insurance. They got into trouble primarily because of their investments in derivatives and in dealing with the money market more so than in insurance products. And the regulatory system there was inadequate. It didn't protect the public, and it could have caused and did cause a lot of pain and problems. We need to have a much stronger regulatory system as it relates to how we protect against gambling on Wall Street, which is not properly regulated. And that's what happened to too large a degree in this crisis. So the question that Prime Minister Brown raised when he was here and spoke to a joint meeting of Congress was whether we shouldn't have some international standards here. I thought he made some sense. I thought it was a good point. To me, there shouldn't be any safe harbors for that type of irresponsible activities, that we should have international regulation to deal with those types of financial activities. We should have international standards dealing with tax haven countries. We shouldn't allow a company to find a friendly country where they can become, where they can avoid taxation. There should be international agreements to deal with that. So I happen to think we do need much stronger regulation in the United States dealing with financial institutions, but we also should seek international standards. The question is, do I support expanding trade opportunities? And the answer is absolutely yes. And I think it's critically important for the international economy and very important for the American economy, extremely important for the Maryland economy that depends very much on the Port of Baltimore and on trade, that we expand trade opportunities. But I want to tell you, I think that the United States represents one of the most open markets in the world. We have opened our market. And I think we have a responsibility in our trade laws to say that there will be certain commitments to have access to our market that we've already made. That there should be commitments for example, international labor standards. If you want access to the U.S. market, you should respect not our labor standards, but the international labor standards. And I think that should be part of doing business. And then there's another issue here that we might have to change our laws to comply with. But global climate change is, to me, the greatest challenge of our generation, the greatest challenge that we need to meet, because it could cause catastrophic effects as we look at drought and as we look at flooding and we look at the impact of global climate change. And I do think that the international trade regime, the WTO, needs to take into account international commitments to dealing with environment as part of being able to deal with international trade. So I'm not squeamish in using international trade to accomplish legitimate international objectives. But your question, to answer it directly, yes, I do believe it's critically important for our economy to maintain open trade. We'll benefit from it.
I know there are a lot more questions, but my chore is to ensure that your enthusiasm for questions do not become a contest with the senator's endurance. And so we're going to have to properly end our session, but we do appreciate very much your enthusiasm as well as your time.